The data that I'm going to share with you is from some work we did on the National Alternate Assessment Center, which is now finished. We just finished our no-cost extension. But some of the instruments that we use to collect these data, I think, will continue on, I'm pleased to say. So I'm going to share the data with you, and then I'm going to tell you some share with you some real-life stories of kids. What we know about kids who are participating in alternate assessments. Now keep in mind that alternate assessments begin in 3rd grade. So we're not talking about senior. My data really looks at kids who are in the 3rd grade, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and one's at high school. So the data I'm reporting reflects those grades and those ages. And the states where we collected our data, 7 states, were assessing only slightly more than 1%. Assessing only slightly more than 1%. They can count up to 1% of their proficient scores. So these states were assessing much fewer than they could. So I just want to put that caveat on the data that I'm going to share with you. And the range in the 7 states where we collected our data was 0.7% of the total school population to 1.14%, okay, of the total population. And here's what we found. We found that all disability categories were represented, but primarily 3 emerged: mental retardation or intellectual disability, multiple disabilities, and autism. And what's important to know about that is not all of those categories were represented. So we didn't have 100% of the kids with intellectual disabilities represented, we didn't have 100% of kids with multiple disabilities represented, and we didn't have 100% of kids with autism represented. We only had percentages of those categories. Approximately 60% of kids with mental retardation. Now or intellectual disabilities is what we found. Now what's important to remember about even these data is disability category data by itself is collected differently in states. And so we wanted to find out more about who were the kids in this 1% population, because we sort of already knew that what we were going to find in terms of disability category. And in the regulation for alternate assessment, it says significant cognitive disability. It doesn't use disability category. So we really wanted to find out who those children were. And you will probably know, if you're familiar with this group of children, you will probably have heard the stories about how highly diverse they are. Well, in fact, they are somewhat diverse. We looked at expressive and receptive language in addition to disability category. We looked at hearing, vision, motor, and alert, the extent to which a student is alert. We also looked at attendance at school, because if you don't come to school very often for whatever reason, that can also present challenges in terms of your access to the general curriculum. And what we found were we do have highly varied levels of expressive and receptive language. But most of the students in this 1%, 70% or more, use oral speech to communicate. 70% use oral speech to communicate. That's really important, because that's not what you will hear when you talk to teachers. You will hear about the 15% of the kids who don't use oral speech and who teachers say have uncertain receptive responses. Okay? I want you to think about that. So, for the small percentage of students who are beginning and emerging in their use of symbolic language, 30%, only about 50% of those kids use odd-com systems. I want to let that lay there a little bit. Because if a student comes to school without oral speech and does not have an odd-com system, he or she cannot access the general curriculum. And so that's something really, really important to think about. Now, what we also found that of most students in this population read basic sight words and use a calculator to solve math problems. So, 70% of the kids are symbolic language users. They read sight words and they use a calculator to solve math problems. That's what teachers told us. The troubling part about that is that it appears that students leave school reading basic sight words and using a math and doing math with a calculator. So these aren't longitudinal data, but the same percentage of kids at elementary, middle, and high school are, and particularly high school, are the same percentage of kids are leaving school, reading sight words, and doing math with a calculator. We don't see an increase in the percentage of kids with higher level skills necessarily. So that's also important to notice. We also see, even more troubling, kids who are emerging in their level of symbolic language use. We see the same percentage of kids at high school emerging in their level of symbolic language use. So, across the 12 years of school, kids in high school are leaving school without symbolic language or an odd-com system. That's very troubling, because we know who these kids are from the day they are born. They receive early intervention services, they receive preschool services, we know who they are. So it's not unreasonable to think that they should come to kindergarten with that communication system, or at least the beginning of a communication system. So that's what our 7-state data are telling us. Not exactly what I thought we would find. The population is diverse. We've got 3 pretty distinct groups of kids in the population. But the majority of the population use symbolic language to communicate, they read sight words, they do math with a calculator. Unfortunately, it appears that once they learn those skills, we don't see a lot more learning occurring. However, the research tells us that students can learn academic content. Browder's research, all kinds of research in the literature tells us that this group of kids can learn academic content. Even my master's thesis, which is now 20-some, almost 25 years old, kids were reading. We can teach kids to read. We can do that. We can develop communicative competence. So kids who are communicating at a pre-symbolic level of language development, who have inconsistent expressive responses, can be taught in very little amount of time to communicate more consistently, and can move up levels of expressive language. It's well documented in the literature. We also have known for 30 or more years that chronologically age-appropriate curriculum and materials that support the development of competence in academic domains. So if kids are included, if kids have access to the general curriculum, we will see growth in their academic competence, and that's what we want to see. We also have some post-school outcome data. And we want to think about this because college and career ready is a new topic on the scene. We know that reading is the single biggest predictor of post-school outcome success among kids with disabilities. We know that a high school diploma is important for post-school success among children with disabilities. But we know that basic communication is essential for minimizing the risk of abuse, neglect, and extensive health care needs. So kids who are leaving high school without basic communication, odd-com systems, that their communication is recognized, are at risk. Not only will their outcomes compromised in terms of work, school, post-secondary education, but they are at risk for abuse, neglect, and health care issues because they can't tell us what's wrong. We have to infer. So we really have to do some thinking about that. And then finally, I want to share the story about Bruce. Bruce is a young man, and Bruce has testified with me before the House earlier, well, last year, back in March, a year ago, last year. Bruce is in a high school program. The first clip of Bruce is Bruce doing some work without his communication device. Now, my colleague and Dr. Kleiner met Bruce when he was in high school, and he did not have a communication device. We got him a multi-level communication device, fairly simple device, and within a couple of weeks, days, he's using a multi-level communication device to tell us about, to analyze weather, analyze data about the weather. So I'm going to show you the clips, and then we'll talk about them a little bit. hopefully if I go here and click it
Let's look at the 23rd. Was the forecasted temperature higher or lower than the actual temperature? Okay, good work. Thanks for paying attention. I've got one more question, okay? Look at these forecasted temperatures. How many days was the forecasted temperature higher than the actual temperature? Okay, that's it. Thank you. You did good work. Give me that.
Without a communication
Good
system,
job.
you can't really tell her. But, watch this.
Let's look at October 20th. Were the forecasted and actual temperatures high, low, or about the same?
The forecasted and the actual temperatures were the same.
Very good. Now, look at these forecasted temperatures. Okay, looking at them. How many days was the forecasted temperature higher than the actual temperature?
8.
And I didn't show you the entire clip. You see a lot more data analysis in the entire clip. This is just a short version. But we can't let kids, Bruce left school. He didn't leave school with a high school diploma. He should have left school with a high school diploma. In fact, he didn't leave school with his communication system because it belonged to the system. So we still have a lot of work to do, and I'm hoping that Bruce isn't an isolated case. But when I look at the data and I see that 12 to 15% of the kids are still identified by their teachers as pre-symbolic language users, meaning that they have inconsistent expressive responses and inconsistent receptive responses, that tells me that we have a lot of work to do. Considering that we know who these kids are from the day they are born, we cannot continue to let this happen. So that's the picture that I think our data is telling us. We also, on the other hand, can't just accept reading sight words and math with a calculator. We have to raise our expectations for the 70% of the kids who are using symbolic oral speech and already have some academic skills. We have to push them to reach higher